Hello and welcome back to Restoration DIY, or if this is your first visit, then hello, it's great to have you here, and I hope you enjoy this episode. This time I'll be making a bowl from a solid blank, cut to form a cross-shaped insert, which I'll fill with coloured epoxy resin. I decided to make a feature banding to better define the resin insert. For this I used ash and walnut, which are cut down to size on the bandsaw. The timber had already been passed through the planer, so this was a very easy process. With that done, I marked the centre of the blank and marked a cut line offset 25mm from the centre. I used the bandsaw to cut the blank into 4 sections, after which I numbered each piece so I could keep them in the correct orientation. I passed each of the feature banding pieces through the drum sander to remove the ridges left by the bandsaw blade, being careful not to remove too much material, which is surprisingly easy to do on this machine. The glue up was next for the feature banding. I actually required 2 sets of these, but I'll just show one being assembled. Also off camera, I switched the clamping setup. The pieces of timber kept sliding around with just the hand clamps. It's the next day and the glue was set up, so with the banding pieces removed from the clamps, I could get on with the next stage, which was cutting the banding to fit around the 4 bowl blank pieces. I used the disc sander to remove excess glue from both pieces, again being careful not to take too much off. I used the miter saw to cut the banding into the required lengths. The mitered corner had to be accurate, but the actual length was okay within a millimetre or so. I've just shown me cutting the banding for one of the 4 pieces. In the next clip I must have nudged the camera, so I'll just show me gluing up a couple of the mitered pieces. I used super glue with an accelerator to cut down on the drying time. The masking tape acted as a clamp to keep them lined up. With all 4 done, I ran each of the 4 blank pieces past the large disc sander to remove any of the cut marks, and then it was ready for the glue up. The glue up was straightforward. I used Type 1-2 applied to both faces to be glued together. Glue on one side might have been okay, but seeing as though it would be under stress spinning around on the lathe, I decided not to take any chances. I used a piece of MDF under the blank to keep it flat whilst it was under clamping pressure. There was a tendency for the banding to be pushed up away from the blank, but with a bit of perseverance I got them all aligned and clamped nice and tight. Another day has passed and the 4 blank pieces can be removed from the clamps, after which I had to create a mould of sorts to contain the epoxy resin. I used 10mm HDPE for the base and 18mm MDF wrapped with packing tape to prevent the epoxy resin sticking to it. With 4 pieces of MDF covered in tape and arranged around the blank, I used hot melt glue to fix them in place. I wasn't confident this would be enough, so I used 2 screws on each corner to make doubly sure they would be secure. I also lined the inside of the mould with more packing tape. I didn't want the epoxy leaking out like it did last time. The screws are made by Spax, and these ones are specifically designed for MDF. They never give any problems, unlike the cheaper brands I've used in the past. With screws to all 4 corners, I could then remove the 4 blank pieces and add the additional tape to the inside of the mould. Once that was done, I reassembled the blanks and hot melt glued them in place, and added some weights to stop them floating in the resin. I used my usual 2-part mix of epoxy resin, 150 grams of part B to 300 grams of part A. I mixed 2 batches to begin with, coloured with sunset orange mica powder. With both batches mixed, I added them to the mould. Fingers crossed there would be no leaks, and thankfully there wasn't. Two batches wasn't enough, so I mixed another thinking that would do, but I still needed more, so I also mixed another 240 grams, which topped the mould up nicely. There was no chance of using the pressure pot for this one, so all I could do was pop the bubbles with a blowtorch and leave it to cure. Another day has passed and the resin has cured. I did stand with it until it gelled. There was a lot of heat, but it soon cooled down and I left it overnight. But at some point it had cracked in the middle, though I had a plan for this eventuality, so I removed the mould, marked the centre, cut the corners off on the bandsaw and mounted it to the lathe using a faceplate ring. I used the faceplate because the middle was cracked and I didn't want to risk using a woodworm screw, plus this was a heavy blank, so the faceplate combined with a tailstock for additional support was definitely the better choice. The Easywood Tools full-size finisher was first up. I set to removing material to get the blank to round. The lathe speed is around 800 RPM to start with, moving up to 1000 RPM when the blank is better balanced. Initially I thought I would keep the bowl very simple, with a slight curve from the base into a straight perpendicular side profile, possibly with a small raised foot, but as I got into the blank I changed my mind and the design developed as I went on. The first thing to change was I went for a slight upward angle into the base, into a much more pronounced curve upwards into the side of the bowl, it was also at this stage I added the raised foot. The 3/8 bowl gouge came in at this point, helping to refine the curve in the base and to define the outer edge of the foot. Going back to the carbide cutter, I initially just wanted to work on the upper section near the rim, but as I removed material, I started to make the second change. I began sloping the side inwards, up into what would become an overhanging rim. This became more of a feature because I uncovered an air bubble in the resin, which forced me to cut a bit deeper to get rid of it. I switched between various tools, but sadly the bowl gouge was just not cutting it. No pun intended. So that took a step back and I ended the shaping with Easy Wood Tools carbide finishers. I uncovered a few voids in the resin, so I mixed up some 5-minute epoxy and filled them with it, and then left it to cure. Whilst waiting for the 5-minute epoxy to fully cure, it was actually a lot longer than 5 minutes before I could remove the excess. I took the opportunity to cut the mortise in the base. I defined the outer edge of the mortise with a thin parting tool. Depth-wise, I cut in about 1/4 inch 6mm. Then I hollowed it out with a freshly sharpened bowl gouge and carbide cutter. Then I cut the dovetail with a dovetail cutter and finished it off with a skew chisel. Next, I formed a dish in the base so the bowl would sit on the outer edge. All done, I then sanded from 80 to 3000 grit. Admittedly a bit much considering this is a predominantly wooden bowl, but it works for me. After sanding, I cleaned down with denatured alcohol and followed that with sanding sealer, which I denibbed with a non-abrasive Scotch pad. Yorkshire Grit was up next, just one coat, cleaned away ready for the Yorkshire Grit microfine abrasive paste. And after the microfine paste, I tried a new to me product, Merkur Polar Shine. I first came across this watching one of the YouTube sailing channels. They used it to cut back and polish gel coat on a boat, so I figured I would try it on my epoxy resin projects. It comes in various grades. I have grade 10 and 5. This being the first time I've used it, the results were promising, and I will be using it again. I was concerned it would get into the wood grain, but by using the foam pad in the drill, I could target just the resin. Now you could do this with any other polishing compound, but having run out of my usual Novus products, the small bottles in the background are empty, I thought I would try something different. To fully test the new compounds, I'll probably do a full epoxy resin bowl in the near future, but for now, with these resin inserts polished, I then applied 2 coats of Wood Wax 22. This is applied with clean paper towel and then polished away with paper towel to leave a deep lustre. And to add a bit more to the deep finish, Hampshire Sheen Gloss Finishing Wax. Just one coat, polished away till no more is being picked up on the paper towel. The finish looks great, though I will be refining the process, perhaps cutting out 1 or 2 of the products I used. So with the outside finished, I turn the bowl around and remove the faceplate, ready for hollowing out the inside. I began with the 3/8 bowl gouge. This went well. The gouge was cutting through the resin on wood very easily. First off, I cut the face off the bowl to get rid of the uneven surface. Then I set to hollowing out, starting at the centre and working outwards. As I removed material, I was hoping the cracks that were visible in the centre of the blank would be turned away, but this was not the case. The deeper I got, the more pronounced they became, and as you can see, these were going to need some additional work to get rid of them. I switched over to the Easy Wood Tools full-size finisher. This has a negative rate cutter, which is much kinder on the resin and would not chip lumps out like the bowl gouge does. I slowly worked my way to the base of the bowl and then concentrated on getting the sides to the required thickness. In this case, I was going for around 10mm. I regularly stopped the lathe to check the bowl thickness and to make sure the cracks were not opening up. Then when I was close to the finished surface, I used the large negative rate scraper to remove any tool marks and blend and fare everything together. Before going any further, I had to remedy the cracks and voids I had uncovered in the base. For this I used 5-minute epoxy, coloured with what I thought was the correct coloured mica powder. However, I think I may have chosen the wrong shade of orange. But no matter, I think it adds character. I placed it in the vacuum pot for a few minutes, and when it had cured, I carefully removed the excess with a carbide finisher. I found that starting at one side and cutting through it, rather than just going at it from the top, gave the best results. A final go with a large negative rate scraper, and it was ready for sanding, but not without a little bit of drama. I had neglected to retighten the locking grub screw which holds the chuck on the spindle, and running the lathe backwards while sanding, it unscrewed itself and came away. Luckily there was no visible damage, but it could have gone either way. I screwed the chuck back onto the spindle, and after retightening the locking grub screw, I finished sanding. After which I cleaned down with denatured alcohol, ready for one coat of sanding sealer. This was denibbed with a non-abrasive Scotch pad, ready for the Yorkshire Grit abrasive paste. One coat, cleaned away with paper towel. Yorkshire Grit microfine abrasive paste is next, applied in the same way and cleaned away, ready for the two new Mercer polishing compounds. Polar Shine 10 is first, applied with a paper towel and polished off with a foam pad in a cordless drill. Then Polar Shine 5, also applied with a paper towel but polished off with a woolen buffing pad. I followed this with one coat of Wood Wax 22. And to finish, Hampshire Sheen Gloss Finishing Wax, one coat, polished off to a deep lustre. That's it, another project finished. And I have to say, I learned a lot from this one. The method for repairing the cracks worked a treat, and the new polishing compounds did a good job as well. Anyway, I'd like to thank you for watching, and I hope you enjoyed this one. If I could ask you to leave a like, subscribe, and comments are always welcome. I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye for now.